Okay, good evening, everyone. Is this on? Can you hear me in here? There we go. Okay, I can hear it now. Let me just pull up the prayers for teachings. I forgot to do that before I got started here. There we go. All right. So again, welcome everyone to this new class that we're starting tonight. This will continue through most Wednesdays through the end of February, other than a short little break for the 2 holidays. Yeah, we'll have some time to go into this subject. So again, I think the only 2 Wednesdays when we won't meet are Christmas and New Year's Day, since probably people have some other things going on that day, perhaps. So, all right. Let's go ahead and get started with just our couple of prayers, and then we'll also do a short meditation, and then I'll talk a little bit more about this course. And tonight's mainly an introduction, but we will get into a little bit of material. Let me go ahead and pull up on the screen the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. So we'll recite this together 3 times, thinking about the Buddha's qualities, but moreover thinking about the fact that every one of us and every single sentient being has the potential to attain these very same qualities, this omniscient mind that is capable of helping others perfectly. So let's recite this with those thoughts in mind. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. And we'll do a short mandala offering. And we're just visualizing the entire phenomenal world, the entire universe transformed into a beautiful kind of Buddha paradise, a Buddha land. And we're making this vast pure offering to all of our teachers, all the holy beings, so we can receive their blessings and actualize these teachings in our minds immediately. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon, I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Then we'll do refuge first time in English and then twice in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangtu bardu dakni kyapsu chi daki chenyen gi pe sonam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shok Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyapsu chi daki chunyen gi pe sunam gi Dola Penchir Sangye Druparsho. All right, let's do a short meditation. And we're just going to spend the first few minutes focusing on the breath, just to calm our mind a bit, or to keep your awareness with the breath in whatever way you choose to work with the breath. And when you see that the mind has wandered from the breath, then just gently guide the mind back to the breath. So again, we'll do this in silence for just a few minutes, and then I'll come in and lead you in a short reflection to set our motivation for tonight's class. So now let's set our motivation for tonight. And to do this, let's examine this idea of mind being primary or central in regard to our experience. We're calling this course Getting to Know Your Mind because in Buddhism, it is so important that we understand that our minds are the sources of our suffering, our happiness. All of our experiences come from mind. So to see how mind is primary, first recall a time in your life when Even though things might have been very difficult or you were dealing with things that in the moment were unsatisfactory, unpleasant, because you had some inner joy, some inner contentment, those external factors didn't disturb your peace. We've all had such experiences where the outside may not have been that kind or wonderful. We were able to maintain a calm, peaceful interior nonetheless. And we can also recall the opposite, when even though things on the outside were very pleasant and wonderful, but because our minds were disturbed at that time, maybe a bit depressed or anxious, it was hard to enjoy those external experiences. Just those two examples show that regardless of what's going on in the external world, it is our internal world that dictates our well being. And of course, in the Buddha's teachings, there are ramifications even beyond that momentary experience that we have. But just acknowledging that mind is primary, mind is key. And therefore, we should have a strong desire to get to know our own minds, to really see what's going on in the mental landscape so we can navigate our lives more skillfully. And this can be the beginning point for your motivation for being here tonight. Certainly, wanting to have a more peaceful mind in this life, to be able to go through the ups and downs of life with more focus, more good intention, more peace. This is a noble motivation to begin with. But we can also think beyond this life, that we are here also to explore our minds with the intention of eventually being free from all the negative states that distort our experience and cause us pain and suffering, as well as causing pain for others. And moreover, to advance all the positive qualities that we possess, our compassion, our loving kindness, our patience, our wisdom, so we then can perfect our own being. So try to set that goal, and what we call bodhicitta, the wish to be here, to work on your own mind and understanding your own mind, with the intention to develop your mind fully, to remove all negative tendencies, and to develop your positive qualities without limit. We do this not just for ourselves, but especially for the benefit of others, so we can then help guide them on this path of awakening, this path of getting to know their own mind. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes fully, and we'll begin. So again, thank you all for joining tonight. This is, as I said, the first class in this series that will go for a couple months here. And I want to thank Venerable Dundrup and the staff here for inviting me to teach this. When Venerable Dundrup approached me on this idea, I think he said it came from Venerable Rabina, yes? Didn't Venerable Rabina thought it would be really useful to do a course that kind of looks at some of the basic elements that are taught in one of the basic program courses, which is a bit more advanced study. On Thursday nights, I teach the basic program here currently. I've taught some of the other subjects here for TNL as well. It's a bit more advanced study, but what I want to do in this course is to really take that kind of more detailed technical study of the mind and make it very practical. That's my hope. If I start to go astray and get a little too technical, then let me know. But nonetheless, this is the aim of this. And of course, it's kind of interesting. When I began with Venerable Rabina, of course, the first course I took with her back in 1996 at our center in San Francisco was on a wonderful book by Lama Zopa Rinpoche called The Door to Satisfaction. But like within a month or two after that, she started with a course that was very similar to this. She used Jeffrey Hopkins' Meditation on Emptiness, which has got a whole lot more information in it beyond the kind of working with the mind and understanding the contents of the mind and what have you. But nonetheless, it was a really intriguing course because it kind of draws you in and makes you begin to be a little bit more curious about what is going on in what we call our mind. What is the nature of our mind? How does our mind function? What are the ways that we need to attend to our minds? And of course, this is really, as I mentioned in the motivation, such a primary topic in Buddhism. It's really what everything boils down to. The external world has its own features that are a product of our minds and that are related to our minds. But that is not what we go about fixing, to try to fix the external world to make it perfect, and then we'll be happy. Because as I pointed out in the meditation tonight, we might have everything perfectly fine on the external. And look at people who are very rich, very well off in this world, who have everything kind of perfect in terms of our worldly view. But they still lack something inside, right? They still don't have that inner contentment. Perhaps, maybe some of them do. I'm not, I'm not aware of everybody out there and what their own minds are like. But once more, we see that mind is really key. If we don't attend to our minds, I even mentioned this in the Sunday class when we were talking about mind training, well, then I don't know what we're doing as Buddhists or calling ourselves Buddhists or even pretending to be Buddhists. This should be our main focus is day in, day out, 24/7, as best as we can, working with our minds. So that's really a little mini background to this. I do have a little bit of a slideshow present, to present for tonight, but really not so many slides. I'm going to mainly be using the text. So again, I'm calling this Getting to Know Your Mind, a practical approach to Buddhist psychology, really understanding the elements of Buddhist psychology and what is entailed in applying that in our lives, okay? So again, this is based on the topic that's called mind and cognition in the FPMT basic program. Again, that's a higher level of study, even though it's called basic program. This was Rinpoche's choice of words. By basic, he meant all the texts and subjects that anyone who's serious about their Buddhist study should eventually study. They should partake of these subjects. But that mind and cognition encompasses two main subjects. The first one, I'm just abbreviating it to this long word, Buddhist epistemology. Epistemology really comes down to how the mind knows. And we really have to understand, not in a scientific basis, it's a Buddhist basis. Science has its own way of explaining how cognition occurs, how knowing of things happens. But we'll look at the Buddhist view of that in brief. And then Buddhist psychology, what the mind is knowing and how beings behave on the basis of their mental states. So it is actually even divided into two different subjects. One is called awarenesses and knowers, and the other is called minds and mental factors. We're going to be mainly focusing on Buddhist psychology. As I put in the title of it, that really is where I want to focus. But nonetheless, even tonight, we're going to touch a little bit on Buddhist epistemology. How is the mind knowing and the different aspects of mental awareness and how are they getting at things? And this is we're going to get into the definition of mind and describing mind shortly, just so we're all on the same page with regard to that. Because obviously, if we look at and by the way, all of these slides I will be putting out on the drive. I can actually share that with you just so you know where everything is. I might do that first rather than a little bit later tonight in case I start to run out of time. If you go to the page for this course, this is the link from the calendar to get to the page for tonight. You'll see that there's a course materials page. And if you click on that, that will take you to a Google Drive. And then the Google Drive will have different folders on it. I'm going to add a folder after class tonight for these presentation slides where you can find a copy of that. And then here is where you find essentially the different texts that we're going to be referring to. The main one that we're going to use, I'll point it out in a moment and talk a little bit about the structure, is this one called The World and Ourselves by Venerable Thupten Gyatso, a monk who's been in our tradition for many, many years. But anyway, I just want to point out to you where those are. So feel free to take notes. It's wonderful to take notes. I always take notes when I'm attending classes and what have you, because it kind of keeps me focused. But just know that I will be putting copies of these slides out there on the internet for you to be able to access. So again, this subject of the mind and kind of knowing what is involved in our process of knowing, of cognizing things, involves both of these, the way that the mind knows, as well as what are the contents of the mind in a sense, and how does that influence our behavior. This is the text that we're going to be using, as I just pointed out to you. I'll be referring to that text even tonight. I just want to go over the contents really in brief. Okay, so we're going to talk tonight a little bit about some of the points in the introduction, the first, I don't know, 10, 11 pages of the book. Venerable Gyatso goes into a nice little introduction. Part one is on the Buddhist world. I'm not going to cover a lot of that because I think it goes beyond what we're talking about here. But nonetheless, know that when we look at the Buddhist world, of course, it does include consciousness, mind. It does include what we're talking about in this course. But there's also a lot of other things he presents in there that kind of go beyond just an understanding of the mind. So I'll give you some indication as to what portion of that you might read. You're certainly welcome to read it all if you wish. There's some interesting topics covered in there. Part two is something I'm going to cover later. I'm going to skip over part two. This is really getting at the ignorance that we have operative in our minds that I'm going to talk about shortly. It's where we take false appearances, things that appear to us that are not correct, not in line with reality, and we hold them to be true. And this is what we call our misconceived notion of self. Self of persons in regard to who we are, self of phenomena. By self, we mean it's sort of identity, things having their own identity versus where does that identity come from if it's not coming from the side of the object. We'll talk about all of that at a later point. I appreciate that Venerable Gyatso puts it towards the beginning of his text, but nonetheless, I think there'll be more relevance to it a little bit later on when we start working with the individual factors that are going on in our minds, one of which is the ignorance that is this misconception. Part three, I'll touch on tonight, and I hope to cover the main points of it tonight. The ways of knowing. This is getting at Buddhist epistemology. It's really the only portion of this text where he deals with how the mind knows. It's a rather lengthy topic when you cover it in the basic program, but again, I just really want to give just the bare bones of understanding how our minds work according to Buddhist view. Not again a scientific view of how consciousness is arising on the basis of the brain and the senses and what have you. We'll talk a bit about some of these things, but mainly talk about once more the Buddhist view of how cognition occurs. How do we actually know things through our minds? And then part four is hopefully what we'll start next week, and that will carry us through the end of the course. And we're going to spend a bit more time on the disturbing emotions themselves, because that's one of the main places where we need to do some work in understanding how they arise, but also getting at some of these other, what we call mental factors. I'll introduce you to that whole topic next week, probably when we get into the beginning of that exploration of the contents of our mind. Essentially, again, what we mean by Buddhist psychology. So that's an overview of the text. You're welcome once more to read the entirety of it, but at the end of each class on a slide, I'll give you kind of what are my suggested things to read, portions of it. It won't be, huge sections. After we get through this introductory part tonight, it'll actually be probably pretty short chunks that you'll be working with going forward. Because again, I'm going to try to take my time and just really go into some of these aspects of the mind in more detail. So again, we approach it from a very practical point of view. In the introduction, we do have two main topics that I want to talk about. The first is the relevance and importance of knowing your mind, which I've touched on already tonight. But I also want to introduce you, many of you are, of course, already know this topic, but make sure you understand why mind is presented in the context of what are called the Four Noble Truths. The very basic teaching that the Buddha gave. It was the very first teaching he gave after attaining enlightenment. And it provides the structure for understanding why Buddhist psychology is so relevant. One thing I might point out in regard to the difference between Western psychology and Buddhist psychology, not that I'm an expert in Western psychology, I make no claims to that whatsoever, but I have some understanding, of course, all of us being in a Western culture, how psychology is approached. Western psychology is wonderful as a tool to help people in this life to have greater peace of mind and to confront some of the disturbing emotions that Western psychology identifies as being problematic for us, especially when those are in excess. When someone has a mind that is driven by anger and discontent and anxiety and what have you, and that plays out in terms of their behavior with other people and what have you. Buddhism says that there's a similar thing going on. We're not that far apart from Western psychology. But Buddhism is driving at getting to a deeper purpose for addressing what's going on in our minds. And that's what I'm going to be kind of presenting as part of this first uh, a few pages or whatever of Venerable Gyatso's text, is really, why do we need something like Buddhist psychology? Western psychology can help you to some degree, without a doubt. I've benefited from it myself at different times in my life where I've gone to a therapist, and it's been very helpful. And I don't in any way want to deny people that sort of access. There's many riches that can be mined from Western psychology. But Buddhist psychology goes further. It's looking at a different worldview. It's looking at things in a larger perspective that goes beyond just this life. Again, I'm not denying that people have wonderful experiences with Western psychology, and it can be quite useful to them. Just getting at the whole point that there is something deeper, something more profound that is going on with Buddhist psychology. So again, I'll be putting on the screen Venerable Gyatso's work. I'm going to go forward a few pages here, hopefully without making anybody too dizzy. This is the introduction. This is page, 6, I think, in the text. I'm just going to highlight a few pages or a few sections that I want to just then elaborate on. Buddhism asserts that all troubles come from these disturbing emotions. There's some of them mentioned here: anger, longing, desire, pride. There are more than that. Don't think that because he only mentioned those three, that those are the only three that are a problem or that we have, which in turn arise from self-grasping ignorance, our universal innate misconception of how we exist as an individual person. So let me talk about this. Essentially, what Buddhism is saying is that all of what we're going to be looking at in this course, or the main thing we're going to be looking at, the disturbing emotions, that's like the real heart of our work. That's the thing that we want to be able to confront and examine and diminish in their strength and eventually eliminate. All of those things are rooted in a fundamental misconception. And it's kind of interesting. It's not just that we're not aware of things, it's that we are actually misconceiving things in a fictitious way. We think that things exist, especially ourselves. This is where everything kind of revolves around this sense of an I, a capital I, that is this person that we are adhering to as having this elevated way of existing. Everything is revolving around that sense of an I. And on the basis of that, we do things and have different thoughts and what have you to protect and defend that self, to give that self what we feel it needs. Well, this whole process is essentially a big lie. We are adhering to something in a way that is fictitious, that is not in line with how it actually exists. And this is something that, according to Buddhism, we have been doing since beginningless time, which is kind of mind-blowing for us to even think about. In Buddhism, we are dealing with the phenomenon that we call mind, which has no beginning and, of course, has no end, because it is a continuity of awareness. Our mind of this life having come from mental moments that immediately preceded this life, which go back into the prior life, which go back into the life before that, and so on, without any beginning. This is the nature of mind. We're going to talk about it shortly in a little passage that Venerable Gyatso has, talking about mind as one of the categories of phenomena, things that exist in this world. So in this concept, we have had this mind that has been tainted by this ignorance. But that ignorance is only there because we haven't done the work to eliminate it. And that's the whole principle behind our Buddhist psychology and Buddhist work, is that we are our whole endeavor is to eliminate what is negative and untruthful, not in line with reality, especially the root of ignorance that all of these other deluded states of mind are based in, and to replace them essentially with a mind that is filled with wisdom, compassion, loving kindness, all these amazing qualities. That's the essence of our Buddhist practice. So again, in our ordinary everyday world, and we can see this in others and we see it in ourselves even at times, we tend to look outside of ourselves and blame all of our problems and difficulties on the things that are out there. If only these things didn't happen, if only that wasn't going on, if only this person wasn't in my life, then I'd be happy. But we don't see that the causes of our well-being are within our own minds. And this work that we need to do of eliminating what is negative and advancing and developing what is positive is really the heart of the path to happiness that the Buddha teaches. So that little statement that I quoted from the text already begins to move us in that direction, to understand that the problem is not outside of ourselves. The problem is inside ourselves, is quite specifically working with the idea that what we have in our minds currently, which is not in line with reality, is the source of all of our problems. So let me read this little paragraph. It's kind of a mouthful, but nonetheless, I do want to just point out this is kind of the longest passage I think that I have highlighted. Overwhelmed by a driving need to please and protect our wrongly conceived selves, again, this false sense of an I, we harm others and ourselves in pursuing what we want and in trying to avoid what we don't want. Never finding satisfaction, we tend to blame everyone and everything other than our own mind for our problems. This leads to alienation from friends and family, fewer opportunities to find happiness and peace, and our lives begin to appear meaningless. The only way to prevent or extract ourselves from the misery and sense of hopelessness in such self created isolation is to combine wisdom, seeing how the self exists in reality, with loving kindness, compassion, and so on towards everybody, towards all beings, especially those we have hurt in our selfishness. Who has access to our minds? Nobody but ourselves. And to stop our disturbing emotions and their resultant unhappiness is up to each of us to generate the courage and determination to train our minds in wisdom and loving kindness. The purpose of Buddhist teachings is to explain why this must be done and how to do it. So again, it was quite a mouthful, but nonetheless, it really is reiterating some of what I've already said. That the goal of our Buddhist practice, the goal of coming to a class like this, is to get to understand what is going on in our minds, so we can begin to address those things that are unhealthy and only the source of our own misery. And again, misery for other people, other beings, who are the objects of so many of our actions, right? So this is the purpose behind why we're here. And what I hope I can convey over the weeks that we have together are some tools to begin to look at these and keep everything once more very, very practical, because that's how it's meant to be. And by the way, I'm not saying that when we go through this in the basic program, the same subject, that it isn't practical. The problem there is that we tend to be very technical and trying to get the exact definitions of things and understand why they are so and blah, 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 blah. I'm going to be using a little bit of that, but I don't want that to be the main focus of our time together. I want it to be about you getting to understand the importance of tending to your own mind. To really get that this is the Buddha's key to happiness. This is how we're going to actually experience a fundamental shift in our well-being. All the other Buddhist teachings are very important, don't get me wrong, but this is really at the heart of what we are trying to accomplish. So, just share another little passage that I thought was really quite nice, talking about these destructive emotions. Is this large enough, by the way? I can make it a little bit larger there. That might be a little helpful for those online in particular, but even in the Gompa here, it looks a little small. Painful in their own nature, our destructive, self-centered emotions hinder our pursuit of peace and happiness. They prevent our gaining any insight from life's vicissitudes, and through them, we create causes for future misery. This is why they are our worst enemy. The flood of confusion and mental disturbance only abates when it is opposed by insight into the way we exist as individuals. Such wisdom diffuses the explosive potential of self-centered anger, desire, and pride, and opens the door to our being able to express genuine love and compassion free from self-interest, and to willingly accept the responsibility of helping others to attain freedom from suffering and its causes. So this is kind of, again, um, reiterating to some degree what I've said, but I like this idea. This is something that I want to kind of highlight as well, is that in Buddhism, we are frequently doing this work together. You know, we talk about eliminating what is negative in our minds. Well, there are tools to do that, but the main tool that we use is by accentuating what is positive in our minds. You know, if we just look at these two very basic emotions that we do tend to have, kind of hatred, anger, towards people who annoy us, who have done things that have harmed us, or those that we love. And then we have love, the genuine wish for that being or some being to be happy. We see that these two are diametrically opposed. This is much of the logic of working with our minds, is to supplant those things that are negative with things that are positive, not just because those positive emotions feel better. I mean, obviously they do in the moment. They have a much lighter feeling to them, right? They give us more joy in our hearts. But the fact is that those that are positive are also grounded in truth. They are also grounded in how things actually are. This is something we're going to be exploring as we go through this course, is really this kind of two ways that we work on our minds. One is we reduce the negative tendencies, not just by kind of suppressing them, which might be a tool that we could use certainly in Western psychology to some degree, though I don't know that that's as often used as other techniques. But we don't just suppress them, we actually supplant them and replace them with those emotions that are positive. Those things that, again, do feel better, but also are true. We can see their validity. This is what first attracted me, well, not first attracted me, it certainly attracted me at some level of my study in the very beginning years when I began studying Buddhism over 30 years ago, was that everything is grounded in logic. It's grounded in reason. It's not like, oh, let's just hit or miss, let's try this and try that. We can look at these things and see how everything on this side of the equation, all those things that disturb our minds, all the things that get in the way of our happiness, are not grounded in reality. They are not looking at things correctly, either on a conventional level, just in our worldly way of going about things, and certainly at a deeper level when we look at how they are all grounded in this fundamental ignorance, this misconception. Well, right now, all these positive things are also grounded in that ignorance, but they don't need that ignorance to be there. In fact, they would thrive and flourish without that ignorance. That ignorance is only there because we've, again, have had it in our mind since beginningless time, and we haven't yet gotten rid of it. But when we get rid of it, all the positive qualities, all of our, compassion and loving kindness and patience, all these wonderful things that are amazing to have, they become even stronger. And they are grounded in things conventionally in an accurate way. Let's just look at these two, just to get a taste for this. The mind of hatred, say there is somebody in my life that has done things to harm me. I am looking at them through a lens that is only seeing that aspect of who they are. There are many people who see positive aspects of that person, right? Good friends of theirs, people that know them in a different light, that weren't harmed by that person. But because that person did that one thing to me, I am making that the whole picture of that person. I am making them into somebody who is an object of my hatred because that's their full identity. That's a distortion. That's not in line with the reality of that person. I haven't taken the time to investigate deeper and see who is that person outside of that one act that they did to me. So at a conventional level, we even see that this is a mistaken idea. We are looking at people through a distorted lens when we have the mind of hatred. Whereas over here, if I generate the mind of love towards that being, which we can do regardless of what they've done to us, and I see them as a being that is worthy of my thoughts, wishing them to be happy, wishing them to have the causes of happiness, then is there anything distorted about that? Anyone? Do you see any distortion about that? It's looking at the bigger view of this is a being who wants to be happy, who's going about trying to achieve their happiness in a misguided way, similar to many of us, right? We're not that far away when it comes down to our fundamental situation. And I'm simply observing them through that lens of loving kindness and wanting them to have happiness. There's nothing distorted about it at a conventional level. And of course, as I said, in the deeper level, when everything is revolving around a distorted sense of an I in regard to the hatred, but doesn't need to revolve around that distorted sense of an I in regard to loving kindness, then I see that there's a deeper grounding in reality, in truth. The positive emotions are all grounded in truth, whereas the negative emotions are distorted. They're not looking at things correctly. And we're not getting the full view of that person or that situation, and we are having distorted and disturbing thoughts towards it. So this is the way that we are often working with the mind, is to recognize that getting rid of the negative emotions doesn't mean we're just going to, you know, repress them or suppress them in our minds. Rather, we are going to supplant them with what is more valuable. What is actually of in greater foundation of truth, but also what will bring about greater levels of happiness and well-being. So again, all of these teachings are essentially boiled down to Four Noble Truths, which is the last subject in the introduction that I want to touch on. Most of you have had teachings, I'm sure, on the Four Noble Truths, but as I said, it's the very first teaching the Buddha gave, and we can say everything else the Buddha taught is an elaboration on the Four Noble Truths. Now, they're called noble or Arya truths because they are truths that when someone has had that direct insight into the emptiness of that sense of self that we are adhering to with our ignorance, when they've had that kind of profound realization, we're going to touch on that more and more here and there in this course. When they've had that, they have seen these truths at a much, much deeper level. The very first of the Four Noble Truths is often called the truth of suffering. Sometimes I prefer to use the Sanskrit word dukkha, because as we're going to see, looking at the three levels of suffering, it goes beyond what we normally call suffering. As it says there in that little highlighted section at the beginning, all things that have karma and disturbing emotions as underlying conditions for their existence, sentient beings, their bodies, their minds, the environments, the world in general, they're all unsatisfactory or in the nature of suffering, or dukkha, which has three levels. Again, dukkha has that connotation of being unsatisfactory. Things are not quite right. This was the first message the Buddha gave, is guess what, folks? Things aren't quite right. You may think that they are, but they really are not. So let's look at these three. I'm going to take it off screen to talk about each of these. I'm just going to introduce you to the titles of them. The first one, suffering itself, is the normal pain and anguish that we talk about when we use the word suffering. Suffering of change is referring to those pleasant experiences that have the nature of changing. And then the third one, pervading suffering, or sometimes called pervasive conditioned suffering, is the general state of dissatisfaction that we are in because of being under the control of these factors. So let me just talk about these again in a little more detail, but not, and I know many of you have had teachings on this, but I think it's always worthwhile to review, to really see the full extent to which the Buddha said that we're dealing with this unsatisfactory situation that we need to wake up to. The Buddha said this as the starting point for everything he taught. Said that the Buddha said at one point, I came to teach two things, suffering or dukkha and the end of suffering. We're going to see that coming up in the third noble truth. This first one has those three elements because we do see that there is something we can quite easily identify as suffering. It's all the painful experiences we have physically, the mental anguish that we experience, getting separated from the beings that we love, having to face the unpleasant things in life. Those things are quite easily identifiable as suffering. We don't need to think about it so much. Even animals try to avoid those levels of suffering, right? They don't want to, be, if they hear like the birds I feed out in my front yard, sometimes the hawks come to get them. If they hear the screech of the hawk or see its shadow flying overhead, they know immediately they want to get out of cover, or get covered somewhere so that they aren't out in the open and subject to being the prey of those birds. Second level of suffering takes a little more thinking, but it's essentially the Buddha pointing out that even what we call pleasure, what we call happiness in this conditioned life, isn't something that we can rely upon. It's not in the nature of bringing true happiness. And look at all the times that we've gone to, especially sensory experiences, looking for happiness, looking for something that will kind of be a relief from the mundane existence of this world, to have the delight of watching a wonderful film or enjoying delicious food or, sexual experiences, all the things that we have in our, wider range of sensory experiences that we can engage in as human beings. We've done those things a zillion times. Have they satisfied us? Have they really brought some level of peace and satisfaction that we are seeking? No, we have to keep going back to them and getting them over and over again. And if we were to pursue them with the idea of trying to induce greater happiness through repeated exposure, they would actually bring about pain. I sometimes point, we get very good at being more moderate in our behavior, so we don't normally experience that type of thing. But when you were like 5 years old, 4 years old, you went to your first birthday party, and there was all this wonderful food, right? Maybe, hot dogs and cupcakes and all these, and you just started like gorging because it just seemed like it was such a wonderful experience of happiness to have this whole array of delightful, delicious food. Well, what happened? You know, after eating so much, you ended up getting sick to your stomach, right? You didn't get more happiness by eating more cupcakes, right? It doesn't lead to more happiness. This is just showing to us that these things that we put all of this onus on and think these are sources of our happiness, they actually don't produce real happiness. These pleasant experiences that are conditioned in this way don't satisfy. They don't bring us to that level of joy and well-being that we are craving for, that we are desiring. Now, again, there are sources of that deeper happiness found inside, working with our minds through the Buddhist path. But everything in our external world and in our way of kind of our day-to-day existence that we think is a source of pleasure isn't actually a source of real pleasure. The third of these is speaking to the whole experience. It takes a little bit more putting on our thinking cap and really thinking about what it is that we are involved in. Essentially, the Buddha says that as long as we are living this existence where we are under the control of two main factors, which are going to be the second noble truth, our karma, the actions that we have committed through our thoughts mainly, but also through our speech and our physical behavior, as well as, secondly, our delusions, our distorted states of mind, our disturbing emotions. As long as we have conditioning by those two factors, we're never going to know any real peace. We're going to continue to be propelled from life to life. This whole thing that we call cyclic existence, samsara. This is what essentially we mean by this third noble truth. We are going to be under the control to go from, through our karma and delusions, to go from life to life without any real peace or satisfaction. And of course, this is the one that we have to get to really generate a strong desire to engage in practice wholeheartedly and do everything we can to free ourselves from this situation and moreover to free others from this situation. We'll talk about that as we go through this course as well, but that's of course the motivation we want to ideally bring to these studies and this work, is to not just do this for ourselves and our own contentment, our own freedom from all of this ridiculousness we've been involved in, but so we can help others to be free from that as well. So this is kind of the Buddha painting a pretty dismal picture, kind of essentially saying, guess what, folks? Again, there was that book, I'm okay, you're okay, or something. Essentially, the Buddha was saying, I'm okay, but you're not okay. The Buddha says, okay, I've gotten to be okay. I've found the path to be okay, but you're not okay. That's kind of hard news to receive, but it's a starting point to get us into the door of the Buddha's teachings, to be a bit curious about, well, then what does the Buddha have to offer about why we're in that situation, how we might be free of it, and so on. The second noble truth is called the truth of the sources or the origins of dukkha. Let me put that on the screen. The true sources of suffering, or dukkha, as he says here. I didn't highlight this, but I'll read that very first sentence there. The sources of our suffering, or dukkha, are once again our disturbing emotions that are based upon this self-centered ignorance, this grasping at this sense of an I that is distorted, that is out of touch with reality, and the karma, the actions motivated by those emotions. Essentially, what we have is we have this process whereby, through our root of ignorance, we are engaging in different mental states that are arising from that. Again, our attachment, anger, and so on. We then create karma actions that are our thoughts extended out to what we do verbally and physically, and that produces the fruits, the experiences that we have to endure. I have a little graphic that I put together for this that I use often when I teach on this subject that I hope you get some benefit from. I don't know. I call it the tree of samsara. Again, samsara is that state that we often refer to as cyclic existence. Essentially, what we have going from the bottom up, so down to the bottom, we see that number one, the roots of the tree are the ignorance that clings to the I, especially, but also all phenomena, to be truly or inherently existent. Again, this is that third chapter, the third part of Venerable Gyatso's book that we're going to talk about later. But that ignorance, I've already talked about it a couple of times tonight. It's the driving force behind the whole process of samsara. It's a mistaken conception of how we exist and how everything exists. From those roots, number two, the trunk includes both the wholesome and unwholesome thoughts we cultivate within our ignorance. Again, in this course, we're going to mainly look at the negative ones, the disturbing, unwholesome thoughts. But again, even those positive thoughts that are a counter force to those, that are an antidote to those, if they're still arising within the roots of ignorance, they're only going to give rise to results within samsara. But as I said, those don't have to be rooted in ignorance. It's where the analogy isn't perfect of having this tree. But nonetheless, our wholesome thoughts and unwholesome thoughts, if they're cultivated within ignorance, they're only going to give rise to fruits and experiences within samsara, within that tree. Eventually, we can cultivate positive thoughts that go outside of this analogy, that kind of go beyond the tree of samsara and the experience of nirvana that ensues from our proper practice. So then the branches, number 3, are the karma, the virtuous and non-virtuous actions we create with their respective thoughts. The virtuous actions that come from our wholesome thoughts, such as our acts of generosity, giving what we have to beings who are in need or what have you. And then the non-virtuous actions that come from our unwholesome thoughts, such as yelling at people who, accosted us because we have a mind of anger towards them. On the basis of those, we have the fruits. Now, if I had a perfect graphic, some of the fruit would be kind of dark and moldy and awful, and some of it would be delicious and delightful, like the little red dots there. But the fruits are essentially the happiness and suffering we experience from our karma. This is the mechanism by which we have experiences within samsara. Rooted in ignorance, we have unwholesome and wholesome thoughts. We have, therefore, non-virtuous and virtuous actions. We, therefore, have suffering and happiness results. That's the whole mechanism that the Buddha is teaching in the first 2 noble truths. And this is, we each are in our own tree of samsara. We each have our own ignorance rooted in our minds that can be uprooted. That's the Buddha's good news with the 3rd noble truth, is that you don't have to be caught in this tree of samsara. Once more, you can attain the state of nirvana, your own personal peace, your own freedom from this tree of samsara. And moreover, you can go on to attain Buddhahood, which is a state where you are then qualified perfectly to benefit other beings, to lead them on the path. So this is, again, speaking to that 3rd noble truth. Let me put that on the screen in the pages that are here in the introduction. Get there, whoops, and click on the right part there. True cessations. Got to move this thing up here on my screen so it's not quite. True cessation of dukkha, or suffering, and its causes. So let me just read the first sentence here. The wisdom seeing emptiness of inherent existence, that wisdom, again, that's the antidote to that ignorance that's at the root, progressively and permanently abandons the many levels of disturbing emotions until one attains nirvana, the state of complete cessation of all disturbing emotions and their karmic potencies. And that's the final goal of those seeking just their own liberation. Bodhisattvas, those on the Mahayana path, continue until they remove even the subtler obscurations and attain a deeper form of nirvana, where they then can benefit other beings. Now, again, that's the good news that the Buddha gave in the 3rd noble truth, is guess what? This isn't how it has to be. It can actually be different. And the question that you would have then, of course, is, well, then what do I need to do? Well, we have to cultivate what are called there the 4th noble truth, the true paths that lead to the cessation of suffering and its causes. It says there in that first sentence, through cessation of suffering and its causes, ending of dukkha, is attained through the path of 2 main things: method, which encompasses a whole number of things that are in a more conventional vein, including our great compassion, developing concentration, morality, and so on, and wisdom. Because once more, you need that wisdom to uproot the ignorance, the wisdom seeing ultimate reality. So the 4 noble truths are a wonderful schema for us looking at what our current situation is, the first 2 truths, and what it could be if we actually put our nose to the grindstone and did what the Buddha is encouraging us to do. Again, the main work in all of this is internal. Again, you do have to be involved in the external world, and it's how we practice things like generosity and observing sentient beings and generating compassion for them and all these wonderful things. We can't be detached from the external world completely, but the inner work is what we really need to do. By generating wisdom, and then of course the method side of it, we often call these like the 2 wings of a bird. that allow the bird to get to its destination. For a bodhisattva to get to enlightenment, we need both wisdom and method. We have to have both elements. You have to be able to uproot that ignorance, and you also have to put this kind of positive energy into things so that we create this state of Buddhahood, where once more, you're not just free from your own garbage, you're in a state to help others to be free from theirs as well. So that's the fundamental philosophy behind all of Buddhist psychology. And I like that he shares it in here, even though this is primarily a book about Buddhist psychology. It's important to have it grounded in that most fundamental teaching that the Buddha gave, so that we understand there's, again, a deeper purpose to Buddhist psychology. Buddhist psychology can help you feel happier in the moment, sure, without a doubt, just like Western psychology has the potential to help you to accomplish that. There's a much, much bigger goal beyond what Buddhist psychology is teaching, okay? It's to actually get free of these things that have bound us in this process of samsara since beginningless time. And there's that t-shirt, right? Been there, done that. Well, we've been there, done that for like so many lifetimes that it's ridiculous. And do we want to just keep doing that? Or do we want to actually get free of that ourselves and moreover, help others to be free from it? And that's the goal. And this tradition of Tibetan Buddhism that we practice, the Mahayana path is embodied. It's really the main goal is to achieve Buddhahood, not just to achieve your own liberation or nirvana, but to go beyond that, to attain a state where you can help others because you're driven by great compassion that wishes to free them all from suffering. So that is an idea of what's in that introduction. Once more, that'll be something I'm going to encourage you to read. In part one, as I mentioned, this is not a section that I'm going to go into in a lot of detail because he talks in there about rebirth a lot and the process of dying. These are all wonderful subjects, don't get me wrong. I've taught on them many times myself. But for this course, I don't think there's as much relevant in this particular section of his text as there will be in other sections, as I pointed out earlier. The first one, though, that I do want to touch on are these divisions of what we call what exists, or what does the phenomenal world consist of? And it's kind of an important thing just to understand the big picture of where does mind fit into all of this, and how does mind get categorized in a Buddhist view of what exists in our world. And then a little bit on the nature of mind. As I mentioned, there's a nice little passage on that. So let's go to that in the text. And by the way, I'm going to try to end in about, 20 minutes or so to give people a chance to ask questions if there are any questions from tonight. If you do have some that come up, feel free to put them in the chat box if you're on Zoom, or certainly to write them down so you don't forget them. So as I said, I'm going to jump to part one now. I don't have anything else from that introduction to go through. But this little section that begins here on, I think it's page 18, existing things. This is the way that Buddhism defines what exists, is that what exists is that which is knowable by the mind. You know, it sounds kind of strange, but we have to say that at some level, certainly, that our minds are involved in even establishing what exists, in giving, of course, an identity to things that exist. This is getting at the subtler way that we talk about that wisdom that understands how things actually exist. Things actually exist through the force of our minds, through identifying what is kind of existing and understanding things that exist through the lens of this mind that we know. So first of all, in this first paragraph, I didn't highlight this, I probably should have, but essentially the main kind of two categories that existing things are divided into are those things that are permanent and those things that are impermanent. Let me talk about this. Venerable Gyatso goes into this a little bit, but we have to get outside of, to some degree, our Western perception of what these two words mean, right? Permanent in our language tends to mean eternal, but that's not the meaning here. You might have things that are permanent that are eternal, but you can also have some things that are impermanent that are eternal. So eternal is not the meaning of permanent. And impermanent doesn't necessarily mean that things don't last, because there are some things that are impermanent that last forever, and there are some things that are impermanent that don't last for very long at all. So once more, what are we talking about by these two terms? And what is this initial division of everything that exists? Those things that are permanent and those things that are impermanent. What we are getting down to is a very subtle truth that the Buddha taught that is actually also something that, as we're going to talk about tonight, something that we can realize at a much deeper level. It's the idea that things that are created through the force of their causes and conditions are changing moment by moment. The word impermanence here means that nature of changing. It's something that is going on with all the things in our physical world, absolutely, but also our minds are changing moment by moment. We're going to get into the categories of these impermanent phenomena shortly. Let's just look at like our bodies, right? Our bodies are changing every single moment. Now we know kind of grosser levels of change that we can see in regard to the aging of our bodies, or even certainly when death happens and this body ceases to be a support for our mind and for life and becomes, worm food and what have you. But essentially, our bodies are changing every single moment. And certainly, like I don't want to get too much into the scientific view because it's not identical. But even from a scientific point of view, when we look at the fact that every cell in this body, I think that the statistic I always heard when I was growing up was that in the course of 7 years, every single cell in your physical body has been replaced at least once. Takes 7 years, I think, for some of them to be replaced, but many of them are replaced much more frequently, like our skin cells that are continually shedding off and new skin cells arising and what have you. This process of things coming into existence, abiding for a while, disintegrating, this is indicative of their subtle impermanence. Subtle impermanence is something that applies to everything that arises from its causes and conditions. So again, this body is a product of the two cells of your parents that came together in your mother's womb, that were the starting point for the physical basis for your life, that your consciousness came together with. Again, a lot of this is explained in Venerable Gyatso's section on the world and rebirth and how this all happens and what have you. Stuff that, again, I'm not going to go into as part of this course. Those physical things, we can see to some degree the grosser ways that they change. And by implication, we can see that they must be changing at a subtler level throughout this entire process, momentarily changing. Once more, our minds are momentarily changing. Look at how fast our minds go from one thing to another and change in terms of the thoughts, concepts, things that are going on. It's like a roller coaster ride, constantly moving. So that's one category of phenomena. And as I said, I'll point out kind of the three main categories underneath that. The other side, what we call permanent phenomena, you might wonder, well, what's in that category? Because it does seem like most of what we deal with in our world is impermanent. It's coming from causes and conditions, right? Arising from something prior to it that kind of gives rise to it, and then that transforms into something else. What's from that song by Joni Mitchell on Woodstock? We are stardust. Essentially, this is true, right? There's stardust that when Big Bang happened or whatever, all of this material stuff that this world came from that we are composed of. All of this in a continual process of change. That's the impermanent side. What is it that's permanent? Well, the example that Venerable Gyatso uses is space, but by space, we don't mean kind of physical space. We mean the absence of any contact that allows for things to abide in that space. So right now I can say this little, water jug that I have here that I'm setting on my table, that it has an absence of obstructive contact that allows it to abide in this space. In other words, it's a negation. It's a thought that we are creating around identifying what we mean by space. And again, it's a very strange definition. It's not my favorite thing to point out as something that is permanent. But permanent phenomena tend to be negations. They tend to be things that are absences. That's something that is not there. Emptiness, for example, is a permanent phenomenon. I was talking about emptiness earlier as this fact that we need to realize that things lack existing in a particular way. That is what we mean by emptiness. They are empty of existing in a particular way. That's a negation, right? It's not something we realize positively. We realize it by negating a way that we think that things exist or that the I exists. So emptiness is also a very popular permanent phenomenon. And there are other ones that are set out, but essentially this is just, again, the Buddhist view of the world is that you have those things that exist that are permanent unchanging moment by moment, because a negation is unchanging, right? The negation of contact, absence of contact where this water jar is sitting, is the same from moment to moment. It's an unchanging phenomenon. It's always a negation of contact, a negation of contact, a negation of contact. Emptiness is a negation of inherent existence. It is continually the same with regard to that phenomenon. It doesn't change. It doesn't arise from causes and conditions. A little hard for us to get our head around. I'm just pointing it out because Venerable Gyatso goes into it. It's not the more important category of phenomena in terms of what we're going to be looking at in this course. It is when it comes to emptiness, obviously, because we need to realize that negation. I'm not denying its permanent phenomena play a profound role on our path eventually in terms of realizing emptiness, a lack of inherent existence, this unchanging phenomenon that has existed with regard to everything that exists. It has always existed. When we talk about impermanent phenomena, we can essentially divide those things that, again, arise from their causes and conditions into three main categories. This is on the next page, page 19. Whoops, went a little too far there. The first one is what's called forms. Form, or what we might call matter in scientific terms. This, again, he gives a little explanation of this, but we essentially don't have much difficulty identifying what this is. We have all the various objects of our senses that we can point to, colors and shapes for our eyes, sounds for our ears, tastes, smells, odors for our our taste consciousness and our odor consciousness, smell consciousness. And then we have tactile sensations, surfaces and what have you that we can feel with our fingers and toes and what have you. All of those forms are obviously a part of our physical world, and they change momentarily. The second category is mind or consciousness, which is a self-perpetuating, non-material stream of brief moments of awareness. And again, this is the main topic we're going to be looking at through these weeks together, is getting to know consciousness. So let's stop there before we go on to the third category. But we see that to some degree, Buddhism is teaching a bit of this duality of what we might call mind and matter, form and consciousness awareness. By the way, I'm going to be using terms like consciousness, mind, awareness as pretty much synonyms. If I'm not using them as a synonym, I'll point that out to you. But essentially, we're talking about a phenomenon that is non-material, that is a continuity of a stream of mental moments that has its own substantial cause for why it is there. Again, it has a way of being identified as quite distinct from matter or form. Matter or form are the physical things that we can know in our world, primarily, again, through our sense consciousnesses, through understanding the things that we see as color and shape and what have you. These two, though, even though we make this kind of divide, are very much interrelated. We'll get into the ways that they're related as part of this course, but essentially, we can see that even in this physical body, our physical form and our consciousnesses that arise are greatly interdependent. Right? I couldn't have my eye consciousness, which is one of my main sense consciousnesses, and most of us can depend heavily upon our eye consciousness, right? I couldn't have that were it not for the physical organs that are here, right? Those are physical matter. If I didn't have the eye and all the various parts of the eye, the retina and so on, everything that allowed me to be able to see, then I couldn't have that consciousness being generated. So once more, by pointing out at least these first two categories of impermanent things that exist, impermanent phenomena, I'm not making them absolutely, utterly unrelated. I'm saying that we can identify them as unique things that have very separate features. What is matter is not mind. What is mind is not matter. But they are very much interrelated. So don't think that Buddhism is teaching kind of a very strict duality when it comes to this, but rather something that we can still identify its uniqueness, its own continuity, but nonetheless acknowledge that there's a very heavy interdependence going on there as well. The third category is kind of interesting. The term that's sometimes used is non-associated compositional factors. I don't remember what Venerable Gyatso uses. He calls it products that are neither form nor consciousness. Again, the little description there from Jeffrey Hopkins, he describes produced things, these as produced things that are neither form nor consciousness, as having essentially two types, persons and non-persons. So we also can include things in here, like at the very end of that paragraph, words, time, area, number, collection. There are a lot of things that are not technically matter nor mind. And if we get down to what we mean by a person, this is, of course, getting at the really fundamental wisdom that we're trying to generate. A person is not the body, not the physical matter, but a person is also equally not the mind. This is something we're going to examine. As I said, we're going to get into this towards probably latter part of this course, when we really examine how do we undermine that ignorance and how do we hold some awareness of that. We come to see that especially this sense of an I, this person that we hold to so strongly, that it's not equivalent to just the body, it's not equivalent to just the mind, nor is it even the combination of the body and the mind. In fact, the way that it exists is actually really, really subtle. It's just simply a thought of I in regard to this collection of stuff. That's the way that the I exists in the end. Therefore, it's in that third category. It is not matter, form. It is not mind, consciousness. It is actually something that is impermanent. It does change moment by moment of the person, right? I can't say I'm the same person I was when I was 5 years old. There's a continuity of a person, but I'm a very different person than I was when I was 5 years old, you know, based on my recollection and how I behaved and what I said and was interested in and so on and all that, who I was as a person. The person is based on these impermanent phenomena of the physical body that is matter and the mind that is in that category, consciousness, non-material, but the person is neither of those. So there are some phenomena that fit into that category. And just exposing you to that, I debated whether I should even talk about these categories of phenomena, but it does once more give us an inkling of how things actually do exist. That in the end, especially the person, this sense of an I, isn't equivalent to either the mind or the body, nor the combination of those, but rather has a very, very subtle way of existing, as I said, just merely designated, merely imputed to this collection. We'll talk about that more, as I said, when we get into the deeper ways of investigating Buddhist psychology and undermining our ignorance. So this was the first thing I wanted to introduce you to in regard to this chapter, this part. As part of this second part of this part one, the Buddhist view of the world, what's it called, the Buddhist world. There's a second part on realms of birth. Again, I'm not going to go into all of that, but as part of that, he does talk a little bit about mind. And I just thought it would be useful before we go too far to spend a little time talking about what we mean by mind and what is entailed in mind. In Buddhism, mind is asserted to be the mere experience of things, either through the five senses or primarily through thought. We can say that there are more direct ways we also know mentally, but essentially we have six main consciousnesses. We have our six sense consciousnesses, and we have our mental consciousness. We'll divide this up in next week's class. Mind is not some esoteric substance in the background that does the experiencing. It is the very experience itself. Our experience of things includes whatever subjective feeling of happiness or unhappiness, or our emotion of love, anger, generosity, greed, and so on, that accompanies our awareness. As it is simply the experience of things, mind is not a physical entity. Even though our mind depends upon a functioning brain and nervous system, experience itself has no material properties, such as color, shape, texture, and so on. Nor is it any of the physiological processes or organs upon which awareness depends. Thus, the human organism consists of a duality of body and mind that are interdependent, but once more, different entities. So again, I did already touch on this. I just wanted Venerable Gyatso's kind words, that essentially what we have and what we call mind is a phenomenon that has some independence from the body, the physical world, but nonetheless is quite intimately involved with those, especially when it comes to this body that it has an interdependent relationship with. Of course, because it is arising from something of similar substance, it does depend upon other prior moments of mind. He goes into pointing out how we can see that that must be so, because it couldn't arise from our parents' minds, or we might be identical to our parents' minds, and so on. I don't want to spend too much time. You can read this whole section. But this is getting at, again, this whole idea that we have to begin to understand that our minds are a phenomenon that has unique properties. And while there is an interdependence with our brains, we're not denying that what's going on in our brains, when we have an infection, or if you were to have some brain problems or whatever, that you could then have an effect on what's happening in our mental terrain. But mind has its own continuity. It's something to be kind of, again, looked at and worked with in a quite unique way. And maybe that's enough to say about it, because we're going to be touching on mind as we go through this. I want to try to share just one more little bit that'll give you something to work with over the next week as well. And that's in the third part. I'll be jumping ahead quite a bit here. Again, I'm skipping part 3 or part 2, as I said, because I'm going to come back to it later. But it is important, as I said earlier tonight, for us to understand to some degree how the mind works. And I'm just going to touch on the very basics of this. First, by looking at sense consciousnesses and mental consciousness. I just pointed out how we have 6 basic consciousnesses, or main minds. We have the 5 sense consciousnesses, again, of eye, ear, nose, tongue, body. And then we have the mental consciousness, which is purely the domain of our mental awareness, without the senses being directly involved, though obviously they are involved to a great degree. And then next week, I will go into the next topic on here, the progression of awarenesses. So let me jump forward, and I'm just going to have enough time to maybe touch on this briefly, but once more, it'll give you something that maybe you can investigate through some mindfulness exercise that I have put together for you to work with this. So first, to understand sensory awareness, or these 5 sense consciousnesses, for example, he says, look at the blueness of the sky, or we could say, look at any color that's in your immediate field of awareness right now. Pay attention, look at even like the pink sort of highlight of the text here. Pay attention to your subjective experience of that color. Almost immediately, you will start thinking about it, or maybe even about something entirely unrelated. This means that your visual perception of that color has faded, and your conceptual mental consciousness has been activated and is thinking about the sky or some other thing, or whatever, again, object that you're observing. If you stop that sequence of thoughts and go back to the simple visual experience of blue sky, or again, pink highlighting, or whatever color or thing that is that you're observing, you will become more familiar with the meaning of non-conceptual visual perception. What the Buddha says in talking about how the mind knows is that these 5 sense consciousnesses, and there are some moments of mental consciousness, we'll talk about them next week, but these 5 sense consciousnesses are knowing things in a quite direct way. The way that I like to talk about them is that they're kind of bringing in raw data, right? So like when we have our eyes open and we're looking around the Gompa here, or you're looking around the room that you're seated in if you're on Zoom, you can take in the whole visual array of, again, colors and shapes that are appearing to you. That's the domain of our eye consciousness. And it's just raw data that we bring in. But what's really quite interesting that Venerable Gyatso pointed out is that our thought consciousness, which is part of our mental consciousness, almost immediately latches onto things and starts a whole chain of processes that are possibly quite unrelated to the raw experience, that could be reinterpreting or misinterpreting the raw experience. And this is just something I want to point out to you, because it's one of the most profound things we have to understand, is the role that thought consciousness in particular is playing in whether we are seeing things accurately or inaccurately. Our sense consciousnesses are pretty non-deceiving, though there are moments when they can be impacted. They say when you have jaundice that you see everything yellow, right? Because of the substances in the body that are induced by that disease, you will have a tainting of your vision so that you see things in a yellow hue. Or even if we put on yellow glasses, sunglasses or something that are tinted, we will then have, again, a variation on what we are seeing that will maybe not be in line with reality. But essentially, our eye, ear, nose, tongue, body consciousnesses are bringing in this raw data in what we call a direct way. We call this direct perception or direct cognition. There's kind of nothing in between. When we see the color appears to our eye consciousness, it gets known. Now, again, how we know color is he even points it out, the whole scientific way of understanding how we see color through light reflecting off of it in a particular way that it causes that particular band of the color to appear and what have you. It's quite profound when we look at it through science. But essentially, everything that appears to our senses is known in this raw, unadulterated way. Unless, again, there's some defect going on that's influencing that ability to get at it. What we do with our thought consciousness is a whole nother overlay. I'm just going to point out one more little section before I take questions, and that's on the very next page of this. This was page 64. Page 65, conceptual consciousness. Thinking or conceptualizing is awareness of things that arises in dependence upon a mental image of the object. Unlike our sensory perceptions, which know their objects directly without an intervening mental image, right? They're knowing them directly, just like I explained. Conceptions are mental consciousnesses that apprehend their objects indirectly through the appearance of an idea of the object. So again, I would share more of this, but I want to, again, allow a little time for questions. What the Buddhist says essentially is that we have these two different ways of knowing, main ways of knowing. One is we bring in all that raw data through our five sense consciousnesses. And then our thought consciousness latches onto it, right? Thinks of it in what we call here a mental image, which don't think it's just visual. Because we can also do this with regard to sounds. We can do this with regard to smells. Like if I asked you to, hopefully all of you have functioning sense of smell. If I asked you to bring to mind the smell of a strawberry right now, right? You can mentally do that, right? Because you've had the actual experience through your nose consciousness, smelling a strawberry, that you've implanted in your memory that you then can bring back up as an image. But you're not, smelling a strawberry right now. You're not smelling that strawberry in actuality, but you are knowing it through a mental image. This is how thought consciousness gets at its objects, indirectly, through an intervening image that is not the actual object. The smell of strawberry that you are bringing to your mind right now is not the actual smell of strawberry. And we are doing this with regard to all of our thoughts, and in a way that makes our thoughts somewhat mistaken. But it's not that we aren't getting at things at all. We're just getting at them in a very indirect way. So what I'm going to ask you to do, and this is just, I'm going to, at the end of each of these classes, and I'm putting them in the slides so that you can refer back to them, is a little mindfulness exercise to try to notice when this is happening. And I realize it can be a little difficult. I'm going to have to go forward here a number of slides. Whoops. Because I inserted all the other stuff that I was hoping to cover tonight. This is your mindfulness exercise. I'll redo these slides so that, again, when I put it out on the drive, you'll be able to see all of these that I presented tonight. Pay attention to the way that raw data, again, is brought into your awareness by way of the sense consciousnesses. And then how the conceptual mind begins to process and work with that data to construct your view of reality and the subsequent thoughts about what you are experiencing. And this getting to know your mind, this is what I want to keep the focus on. Understanding how the mind knows initially. We're going to get into the contents of the mind going forward. But really this idea that this is one of the main things we have to be aware of, is that we are altering what is happening through these more direct ways of knowing by the thoughts that we are having on the basis of the whole thought processes that follow. When we bring that mental image or that idea of something, our own view of reality into our awareness, and then we begin to think about it, to overlay on it, to add all kinds of things on top of it that may not even be there at all. Right? Okay. Then in terms of the reading that I would like you to do, again, you're welcome to read that introduction that I covered in brief. And then you can even read part 3, because I think it's good to read ahead if you can. Part 2, as I said, part 1 that I covered very in brief. There's only a few pages there. Optional reading, if you wish, you can read the sections 4 and 5 that are there. And then the part 3, the ways of knowing, that's not very long. It's only about 8 pages. And that's what I'm going to discuss more next week. And then we begin getting into the actual mental factors and understanding the contents of our mind, kind of veering a bit more into Buddhist psychology. Though there will be still some kind of functional aspects of that that we'll be touching on. So any questions or comments from tonight? If there's someone in the Gompa that has a question, there's a microphone. If you're online, you can unmute and let me know. Or if there's, I don't think there are any comments in the chat. Okay. So again, in brief, what I touched on tonight is really understanding how mind is central and primary, beginning to understand a little bit about the Buddhist worldview and the Buddhist philosophy that all of this is embedded in. That again, we're not just trying to learn about our minds so we can be happier in our day-to-day life. That can be a byproduct of this, absolutely. It's the wonder of it. It actually can work in the moment as well. But there's a deeper purpose. That's spelled out once more in the Four Noble Truths, and really what it is that we are trying to achieve through our Buddhist practice. A more lasting peace for ourselves, and even to go beyond that to help others in our own attainment of Buddhahood. And then a bit about phenomena, especially the mind, and a bit about these different ways of knowing. Again, in the whole course that is involved in that, I think, again, it's called Awarenesses and Knowers. There's like a huge investigation into all the different dimensions of all that. It gets really kind of complicated. But one of the most important things is what I pointed out tonight, is just these main two different ways of knowing. Things that are quite direct in getting at objects without any sort of intermediate object that we are using, and then our conceptual mind that is always seeing things through an idea of what they are. All right? Is everybody seeing that? Is that clear to everybody? It's one of the most important things because the terrain of our Buddhist work is changing our thoughts, is working with our thoughts and coming to see what is accurate, what isn't, what is more beneficial, and what only leads to more suffering and difficulty. So, all right, good. Thank you all for your attention tonight. And let's go ahead and do the prayers that I have for tonight, just a few of them, in order for us to dedicate all this merit that we've created by being together tonight. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Then we'll do the first prayer on here for His Holiness, but as we recite this, we can think about all of the other teachers who are in our world, in our lives, and make strong prayers for their good health, their long lives, and for their holy wishes to be fulfilled immediately. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. We've got time tonight to do the full prayer for Rinpoche's swift return. Again, Lama Zopa, our spiritual director, trying to create the causes for him to be re-embodied again after having passed away in last year in April. So we're going to make strong prayers for his swift return. Fearless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. And let's lastly dedicate for any beings that we have some strong connection to, that we're feeling in our hearts right now, who are going through difficulties in their lives. Maybe they have illness or obstacles, or perhaps we even know those who have died recently or might be dying at this time. And we might also be moved by various parts of the world where there's great suffering and strife right now, and the beings that have to experience that. Whoever it is that you're holding in your heart, feel that you're sending out all this positive energy to them so they can receive the benefit of it, have all their suffering removed immediately, and bring them all the causes that will lead them to true peace and happiness. And may all beings find complete freedom from suffering and complete, pure, peaceful happiness by virtue of what we've done here together tonight. Okay, thank you all. We'll continue with all of this next week. Enjoy your reading and your mindfulness practice, and take care. Again, thanks for coming tonight. All right. Thank you, Shayla, on board for the Zoom team, and thank you, Venerable Dundrup here, and Lou for your support. Okay, everyone, be well.